31 million people watched it happen. Less than 3% caught the detail in the paperwork that made the IQ claim impossible to defend. Not embarrassing, not debatable, but mathematically, documentably, permanently impossible. By the time the clip had been live for 6 hours, it had been segmented into 10 independent pieces and was spreading at a velocity that the platform's own monitoring systems flagged as anomalous. By morning, 3 academic institutions had issued unsolicited statements, not about Trump, not about the show, but about the document Ricky Gervais had held up under the studio lights, the one he had read from without rushing, without dramatizing, without editorial comment of any kind, because the numbers on the page required none. By the following afternoon, the story was no longer about a late-night broadcast. It was about what it means when a claim a man has made his entire adult life meets, in a single live television moment, the only thing capable of ending it, the original paperwork. To understand what broke that night, you have to go back to before it began. The studio at the Hammersmith Apollo had been configured for a taping format it almost never runs. A seated, desk-facing setup, 2 chairs, lights pushed 2 stops harder than the standard configuration. The head of technical operations later said she had never seen the room feel so much like a courtroom and so little like a stage. The warm-up act finished 11 minutes early. Nobody refilled the time. The audience sat in the specific quiet of people who have been told, without being told, that what they came to watch is not what they expected to watch. Ricky Gervais was already seated when the floor director gave the 5-minute call. He had one item on the table beside him. A single manila envelope, sealed, with a chain of custody sticker along the left edge that the front rows could read as institutional rather than theatrical. His hands were in his lap. His face contained nothing. The air inside the studio had the compressed, expectant quality of air that has been asked to hold its breath. Trump arrived in the register he always arrives in, as if the room has been waiting for him, and he has arrived precisely when he chose to. Not a moment before, not a moment after. His walk moved through the available space the way a ship moves through water, not around resistance, but through it, each step placing weight with the deliberate certainty of a man who has never in his adult life walked into a room he did not intend to own. At the chair he paused. His hands went to the jacket, a brief, precise calibration of surfaces before the commitment. He settled with the completeness of something finding its lowest point, wide, claiming every inch of the chair's accommodation, exhausted. His eyes found Gervais and held there, flat and measuring. "Nice setup," he said, addressing the room as much as the host. "Very intimate, very—" He paused, selecting the word with the care of a man who knows the selected word will do work. "Small." The audience gave a sound that lived in the space between recognition and discomfort. What came next was a clinical inventory of grievances dressed as observations. The show, he said, was a curiosity. A British comedian working a format that worked better with American hosts because Americans understood the stakes of cultural dominance in ways the British, gracefully, did not. He called the room intimate in the way that rooms are intimate when they are not large enough for the material being discussed. He arrived at the personal attack with the ease of a man who has spent decades discovering that the personal attack, delivered gently, lands harder than the aggressive one. A comedian, he said, who had built a career on puncturing delusion in others without examining the substantial delusion required to believe that pointing a finger at power constituted a form of it. He built to the IQ claim the way he always built to it, not as a boast, as a fact, delivered in the tone of a man citing the weather. He had a tested IQ of 150, he said. He had always been in the top percentile. He had always been the smartest person in the room, in the building, in the category. "You can check," he said, with the confidence of a man who has said those words so many times without consequence, that consequence has ceased to feel like a possibility. The records are there. Gervais had not moved. The silence he allowed was not social silence, not the pause of a man gathering his response. It was operational silence, the kind that has a purpose before it has a word. The air in the room changed during it the way air changes before rain, not with drama, but with pressure, with the sense that the atmosphere has been reorganized around something coming. When he spoke, his voice was low, carrying the particular weight of words that have been chosen a long time ago and kept waiting for the right moment. "You've had your 5 minutes," he said. "Now let's find out why you're terrified of one question." He reached for the envelope. He did not tear it. He opened the flap with the deliberateness of someone who has been waiting to perform this specific action for long enough that he is not going to rush the performance now. What he removed was a single sheet. Not a folder, not a stack. One page. He held it up. He described it before reading it. A standardized aptitude assessment, administered under the Wharton School's 1970 incoming student protocol. bearing the original institutional stamp, the administrator's initials, the candidate's coded enrollment number, the same number that appeared, cross-referenced, in a secondary institutional record he had obtained from a university archive. He lowered the page to his eyeline. He read from it. He did not editorialize. He read the category labels and the scores beneath them, in the same measured voice a man uses to read a restaurant menu to someone who cannot see it. The verbal reasoning score, the quantitative score, the composite. He finished reading. He placed the page on the table, face up. He looked at Trump. Not 150, he said. He let that sit for the specific duration required for a room to absorb a number it was not expecting. Not close to 150. Trump's jaw moved before his voice did. He said the document was fake, that it had been manufactured, that the archival system at Wharton had been compromised, that anyone who had access to a document management system could produce whatever score they needed on whatever form they needed it on. His voice had the particular velocity of language being deployed as a physical barrier, not to persuade, but to occupy space, to prevent other things from entering it while it was present. Gervais waited. He let the velocity spend itself. Then he reached under the table. The second item was a chain of custody document from the university archive, a formal record of the document's provenance, the request under which it had been obtained, the archivist's verification signature, and a secondary authentication from an independent document forensics firm. He placed it beside the first page without comment. Then a third item, a printout of the IQ conversion table for the aptitude assessment format used in the 1970 Wharton Protocol, published by the assessment body itself. He placed it beside the second document, 3 pages, on the table, facing the camera. Trump's left hand came off the armrest. His fingers closed against his palm. The motion was slow, the kind of slow that is not deliberate, but is the result of the body's processing time exceeding its normal rate. A woman in the front row pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum and held it there. A screen behind them changed. A timeline. The dates of Trump's public IQ claims displayed in white type against a dark field, beginning in 1988 and running to the present. 37 years of the number 150, delivered in speeches, in interviews, in depositions, on social media, in books, in the specific register of a man who has repeated a thing so many times that the repetition has become the evidence. Beside each date, the venue, the audience, the context. Gervais let the timeline run without narration. Trump talked over it. Gervais did not raise his voice. He slowed down. He let the silence between his words carry the weight that the timeline was already holding. "I'm not making accusations," he said, his eyes moving between the screen and the 3 pages on the table. "I'm doing archaeology." He looked at Trump. 37 years of the same number, he said, and the archaeology leads to 1 page. A door at the side of the stage opened. A woman, late 60s, retired Wharton administrative faculty. She had worked in the registrar's office for 22 years, including the years in which the 1970 incoming student assessments had been administered, processed, and archived. She had not spoken publicly before this night. She spoke with the unhurried precision of someone who has spent decades working in a system that rewarded accuracy above all other professional qualities, and for whom inaccuracy, when it is observable and documented, produces a specific and unignorable discomfort. She named the assessment. She named the scoring protocol. She confirmed the authenticity of the document on the table. She said she had verified it against the archive copy the previous afternoon. She looked at the pages on the table with the expression of a woman looking at something she has known about for a long time, and has found, at this point in her life, to be more difficult to remain silent about than to name. Trump called her a retired bureaucrat with an ancient grudge and a platform she had not earned. She absorbed the characterization without visible reaction. "That belief," she said, not looking at him, looking at the document, "cost me more than any lawsuit ever could have." Staying quiet while something false became permanent costs more than speaking. She did not elaborate. The room did not require it. The second witness came through the same door 2 minutes later, a man who had served as a consulting editor on 2 of Trump's published books, the ones in which the 150 IQ figure appeared as documented biographical fact rather than personal assertion. He had worked on the passages. He knew the sourcing. He had signed an NDA covering his editorial work and the materials he had reviewed. He said so without drama. His voice held before the first sentence, the throat working, the jaw setting, the specific gathering of someone who has been rehearsing the distance between deciding to speak and actually speaking and has finally closed it. He described the editorial process. He named the specific passages. He described what he had been told to treat as documented when he understood it to be asserted. He described the instruction. He described who gave it. When Trump rose and said, "You signed a contract, you know what that means," the man did not step back. He looked at him with the specific calm of someone who has already paid the price in his own mind and found it manageable. "I stayed quiet because I was afraid," he said. "But I was more afraid of what it meant if I never spoke." The audience did not break loudly. A woman in the right section, third row, aisle seat, brought her hands together once, slowly. The sound of it was precise and deliberate, each impact distinct in the stillness. The sound of someone not performing applause, but producing it as the only adequate response to a moment that had run out of other available forms. A second person joined, then a third, then the tide, rising from multiple points simultaneously, hands coming together, not in the cascade of a crowd that has been released, but in the measured convergence of an audience that has arrived independently at the same conclusion. Trump's breathing had been visible for several minutes before the witnesses finished, the chest operating at a rate that his posture was working steadily to conceal, the effort itself visible in the set of the shoulders, the rigidity of the spine. His hands had closed against the armrests with a grip that left the skin at the knuckles pale against the fabric. His eyes moved through the room without settling, to the documents, to the screen, to Gervais, to the camera positions, to the dark behind them, and found no surface that offered what they needed. His voice, when it returned, moved through the stations, fabricated, coordinated, a hit operation. His attorneys were engaged. He had been through worse. He was still here. The real records would show the real number, and everyone in the room would owe him an apology they would not be capable of delivering with adequate sincerity. The voice reached its highest register, and then the fourth item appeared on the table. A secondary document, forensic analysis of the composite score, a statistician's assessment of the probability that the composite reflected in the archived assessment could, under any legitimate retesting protocol, produce a self-reported score of 150. The probability less than 1/2 of 1%, not zero, less than 1/2 of 1%. Gervais read the figure. He placed the document beside the others. He looked at Trump. "This started with your words," he said. "It ends with your silence." A pause. The weight of the room concentrated around the next sentence. "And your silence," he said quietly, "is the loudest thing in this room." Trump opened his mouth. The floor director near the back of the set stood with his clipboard held flat at his side, not reading it, not moving, watching the desk with the expression of a man who has stopped performing his job because the thing he is watching has made the job feel irrelevant. A camera operator in position 2 held her lens on Trump's face without adjusting for 19 seconds. He moved toward the exit corridor without responding, without looking at the documents on the table, without looking at the witnesses, without looking at the camera that was still on him. He moved the way a man moves when the room he is leaving is not the room he arrived in. The clip was live in 7 minutes. By morning, the 10 segments were moving across 6 platforms at velocities the monitoring systems classified as category-level events. The 3 documents on the table, the original assessment, the chain of custody record, the probability analysis, were reproduced side by side on 2 network broadcasts without commentary. The word archaeology appeared as a segment title on one network and as a standalone caption on 3 independent media platforms, displayed beneath the frozen image of Gervais reading from the page. Trump's counterposts arrived in sequence, measured, then longer, then escalating, then operating in pure capitals, each promising a lawsuit that had not materialized by the time the next post arrived. Each denial was screenshot and placed beside the segment it was denying. Composed man on the left, unraveling text on the right. Forums cross-reference the archivist's retirement records, the editorial consultant's NDA registration date, the assessment body's own published scoring conversion tables. The lawsuit was not filed. The counter-documentation did not arrive. Months later, people were still watching the clip of the camera operator in position 2, counting the 19 seconds, asking what she had seen in his face that she could not bring herself to stop recording. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications. The next confrontation is already building, and once you see what's coming, you'll understand why silence is always louder than power.